Coming up next on The Voice of Alabama Politics, a special edition. We look at the Hubbard Chronicles. And is the Alabama Supreme Court trying to set Mike Hubbard free?
Jailbreak! Enos! Get me out of here! This door's stuck! Come here, you dipshit! Open this door! Rush, don't get in here!
Maybe. Maybe not. Yep. Nope. Who knows? It's the Alabama Supreme Court. They make it up as they go. All this and much, much more coming up next on The V. Welcome to The Voice of Alabama Politics, where we tackle the tough issues so you have the hard facts. I'm your host, Bill Britt, and as always, I'm joined by Susan Britt.
Yes, we are.
Kind of a special edition
It's time
this
for
week. You know, the Alabama Supreme Court this past week heard oral arguments in the Mike Hubbard appeal. And while we don't know what the court will do, we do know how this all began. Because the drumbeat, the Mike Hubbard's indictment in 2014 began when we started focusing in on his activities in 2011. And Susan, I remember you and I sitting with Mike Hubbard in 2010 after they had taken control of the State House, and you and I left with a totally different impression of Mike Hubbard than what we had been led to believe by our Republican friends.
Yeah, we did. We were so excited to meet the speaker. We'd heard all these great and wonderful things about him, how impressive he was, how smart he was, actually how kind he was. And whoa, after we got through that meeting, not the feeling I had at all. I felt like I was sitting in the room with Michael Corleone.
Yeah, I mean, it really was like being in the room with a wannabe mafia don. It's somebody that used the trappings of power to enrich himself, to punish his enemies. And that's exactly what Mike Hubbard turned out to be.
I felt like I needed to I wanted to go home and scrub my skin with steel wool. I felt so grimy when I walked out.
And I remember you and I talking and saying, maybe we just got a bad first impression. But we realized during the 2011 session, one of the first things that happened was a bill passed that you could see only profited a narrow group of people. And so...
mainly one particular business.
Yeah. So you and I would go back and we look at it, and sure enough, it only profits one business here in Alabama. And we wondered, why would an entire legislature pass an act that only profited one business?
Oh, we found out, didn't we?
Yes, we did. We found out a couple of weeks later when the campaign, or when the finances were filed, the contributions were filed, that the day after that bill passed, $100,000 went into the Republican House caucus coffers, and it was just right then we knew it. It was pay to play all the way.
And then right after that, not too long after that, the one that really perked my suspicions was the big Paris Air Show.
Yeah.
And everybody was going, from the governor, lieutenant governor, the Secretary of Commerce. I mean, there was this huge gaggle of people, which, we had just passed the ethics laws, and, the Republicans came in and said, these junkets were going to stop. Alabama can't afford this. And here they were going on a junket.
Yeah.
So we started looking at actually who the state of Alabama was paid to go on the junket.
Yeah.
And Mike Hubbard threw up his hands and said, oh, no, the state's not paying for me. My client, Southeastern Alabama Gas District, is paying for it. And I thought, client?
Yeah.
Utility company is paying for your parish. Okay.
Right. And then we went
There's
back
something smelly.
and looked, and there had been a press release saying that they had hired the Speaker of the House, Mike Hubbard, and how they welcomed his to his team. Well, one news outlet had written about how wonderful and all this is, and we wrote about it and said, how is this not a violation of the ethics law?
Yeah.
Now, Hubbard was charged with that as a crime,
Right.
but he was acquitted because he had received a formal opinion from the Ethics Commission.
Correct.
Even though Jim Sumner testified and said it never meant that he was allowed to do this contractual work. Mm-hmm. But those were the germinations that happened in 2011.
And it was interesting when we started reporting on all of this, all these doors started shutting that had been opened before.
Yeah, yeah.
And we didn't really know where it was coming from. In fact, they had convinced us it was another outlet in town that was doing this, when all along it was the Speaker shutting those doors to try to shut us out of Montgomery.
And I think this actually, and I don't know, to me, that was just kind of telling. When we sat down with Mike Hubbard, with Dale Marsh, with Luther Strange, with other Republican leaders.
All before we launched the website.
We sat down with them, and I think I set us up to be a target in the very first meeting with those folks.
I think you did.
Because I said, we are going to hold you to a higher standard than the Democrats.
Right.
Because you have promised in your handshake with Alabama, transparency, ethics reform, good government, that you said that the Democrats never offered us. And I said, we are going to hold you accountable for your words. And I think I slit our throats right then and there. I mean, advertisers that we had that had promised to come on board with us, folks that were supporting us, would not even take our call.
No, they wouldn't.
And we found out later that it was Mike Hubbard using his office to destroy us. But it got worse than that over time. But I remember after the Southeast Alabama Gas District, one of the big ones, that this is one that really kind of solidified a lot of what we knew about Hubbard, this was during the 2012 legislative session, I think it was. And it's one of those things that you don't really even believe that happened to journalists. So we are at home. It's like 10 o'clock at night. We're ready to go to bed. Maybe it was a little later than 10, but we were ready to go to bed.
It was late.
And the phone rings. And I pick up my phone. I go, hello. And they go, look at PBMs.
Click.
Click. I'm like, I looked at you and went, what's a PBM?
What's a PBM? I have no idea.
I don't know. Is that a candy bar? Whatever it is. We knew it had to be something legislative. I called, back then there were only three of us. Me, you, Brandon Mosley.
And we were working for free at the time.
Yeah, none of us made any money.
Nope.
And so I called up Brandon Mosley and I said, Brandon, what's a PBM? Because Brandon's the smartest guy you're ever going to
He's
meet.
a walking encyclopedia.
Yeah. And he goes, that's a pharmacy benefit management company. We said, okay, we need to find out who's in that business in Alabama. Well, it turns out, amazingly, that in a budget that this thick.
That's what the general fund budget looks like every year.
There's a narrative in there. But in that narrative, we found 23 words.
Little words.
23 words that gave the
American Pharmaceutical Cooperative Inc.
American Pharmaceutical Cooperative Inc. a monopoly, a virtual monopoly over Medicaid pharmacy benefits. And then we dug a little closer and found
that it was a client of Mike Hubbard's.
It was a client who was paying him thousands of dollars a month.
Right.
Now, he was convicted on those 23 words that we found in an obscure budget because someone called me past my bedtime and went, look at PBM.
But here's the thing. It wasn't that just the words were in there. He voted on it 12 times.
I know.
With Josh Blades screaming in his ear, it's illegal. You can't do this.
And Josh Blades was his chief of staff at the time.
Now, and that night, let's not forget, There was a meltdown in the State House where it was Dax Swadek and John Ross and all of them, who that was their client. Come to find out, Farrell Patrick was involved and all this. And they were firing, lobbyists firing their clients in the halls, Josh Blades in tears in the Speaker's office, because everybody knew they'd broken the laws and their fingers were in it.
Yeah. Well, and all those guys testified.
They did.
That was an illegal contract, that they felt that Now, Hubbard was convicted on that.
Mm-hmm.
He was convicted on taking that money from APCI. But we're going to have to get to that next segment, all right?
Looking forward to it.
You're watching The V, a look back at Mike Hubbard, the criminal.
What a great opportunity for your success. Adding 500,000 highly skilled employees to our workforce by 2025 is how we stay ahead in Alabama. Our economy is stronger than it's been in years, and a skilled workforce is more important than ever. Things move fast, so choose your path. Your success is waiting, plus a great future for Alabama. Success Plus. Go for it.
The Energy Institute of Alabama promotes reliable, affordable, and clean energy to help grow our economy, create high-paying jobs, and build public support for Alabama's energy industry. The Energy Institute of Alabama is the best source of energy industry information and how it affects households across the state, from convenient energy production to alternative fuels to solar power and beyond.
What are you doing today, babe?
I thought I'd head down to the lake with the guys, do a little fishing. Of course, none of us will be wearing our seatbelts. I'll lose control of the truck, wrap it around a tree, and kill us all.
Okay.
Drive safe, Alabama. A message from your Alabama Department of Transportation.
Welcome back to The V, the voice of Alabama politics. Susan, as we look back over the nearly 7 years of covering Mike Hubbard, some 4 years before he was indicted, we didn't realize at the time. We realized that someone was going after us, but we found out that after we started going after Mike Hubbard, he was not taking this lying down. He went after us. They called our advertisers. They called our backers. They even went after our friends and family.
They did. They put us on, we were on the Speaker's hit list. All of a sudden, people in the State House we'd known for several years weren't speaking to us. People wouldn't, we'd get on the elevator, they'd get off the elevator. Friend of ours we were down visiting with right outside of Goat Hill Museum. The Speaker saw this person, called them on their cell phone, and demanded they come to his office immediately.
It got so bad that they actually, and this was basically an operation of the Dax Swadek, Tim Howe, John Ross, where they wrote up this fake stories about me and you.
Talk about fake news.
Yeah, and released it to the 6,000 mailing list of the Alabama
Twice.
GOP.
Twice.
Was it twice or three times? And I mean, it was...
It's been so long ago, who can remember? He's been under indictments.
Mostly
Jesus.
lies that they tried to tar us with, some truth. Mostly tried to destroy our reputation. They followed us in black SUVs, or not SUV, but Crown Vics.
Crown Vics.
They came on our property, both in here and in Hunt. And
Taking pictures with big zoom lens cameras and all of that.
Mike Hubbard even threatened me. And I told that little runt, I said, if my wife gets a hangnail, it's your fault. If my dog gets hit, it's your fault. If anything happens to my family, it's going to be on you, big boy.
And at the time, everybody knew if something happened, it wouldn't be a result. The security people in the State House were so worried about us that they made us go buy guns. And actually, one of the security officers taught me how to fire a gun.
Yeah. And we carried guns every day. because
to.
they were not playing.
No.
And they would hold meetings of the GOP, especially the House caucus, and say that we were liars and saying that we were crazy and that we were making all this stuff up. And I said, well, one of those is probably true. I am probably crazy. But, you know, the thing we learned is that we kept reporting on Hubbard, and many of our reports, including the investment in Craftmaster, the SIO2, a lot of those things ended up with being the very crimes he was convicted of. We reported it, and meanwhile, Matt Hart was investigated. After he was indicted, Susan, the GOP rallied behind him.
They rallied behind. They had a big. It was because it was right before the election that he was indicted,
Right.
and so they all went to Lee County and what a great guy he was, and we started counting faces in the crowd.
Yeah.
Those faces aren't around much
Some
anymore.
of them, but a lot of them are still around.
Yeah.
And they stood by Mike. Some of them will pretend that they never knew him, but they did.
They did.
I mean,
and they had the I Like Mike
yeah.
stickers and all of that stuff.
And these people were so enamored with the jersey that they tried to pass laws that would protect Mike after he was
And
indicted.
they're still doing that.
Yeah,
Are you kidding
yeah.
me? Plus, there was still, you know, we were talking about the emails and all. It's still the same misinformation now with who's a principal and this and that and the other that it was then that we were crazy, we were out,
Right.
you know. And it's been misinformation all along. At that time, during the right after the indictment and during this particular rally right here was, innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
And that was the mantra for the
Right.
next 2
Right.
years.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Yep.
Here you've got the Speaker of the House indicted, and here Republicans going, there's nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. They called it a political witch hunt.
They did. Now, also remember that this same misinformation that we're talking about, although when Hubbard was indicted, he did have to let his clients go.
Yeah.
But he still used his office for personal gain even after that.
Sure he did.
To try to manipulate the system so that, a lobbyist definition wasn't exactly what it was. And who knows what the principle is. And this was all pre-trial to try to taint the jury and the judge.
One of the biggest crocs is this whole idea that no one understood what a principle was, and they don't now.
Yeah.
Because what happened was you had some big Republican donors that had given Mike Hubbard money and things of value, and their names were brought in as unindicted co-conspirators. Well, they didn't like that. Well, they wanted to get rid of the idea that a principal, who was a principal. Principal, according to statute, is any entity or person who hires a lobbyist.
It's that simple.
It is that simple.
That's the way it reads.
Well, they started saying, well, it's confusing. We don't know who a principal is. It's the person that's the head of the company. That's the guy.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to get in trouble as a principal, don't give money to a lawmaker. Simple.
Really?
But, all right, so recently, Greg Albritton and Dale Marsh introduced a new ethics bill that they proposed to get through. And Susan, one of the things they did is they said they clarified what a principal was or who a principal was. Tell them how clear
I'd
it
like
is.
to know where in every bill you have your summary and your proposal up in the front of the bill. Then you have the actual code, the constitutional code in the back. And that's there so you can see how the summary will actually affect it. So they cross out words like an A and replace it with a D, or they add in this line that changes the. I went straight for principle because that's exactly what they wanted to do with this bill, right? Was wanted to define principle. They didn't change a comma.
No.
Not even a comma in the definition of a
because
principle.
it still is an entity
Entity
or an
or-
individual who hires a
lobbyist.
lobbyist. What they wanted to do was muddy the waters so that Hubbard could be free.
Yeah.
We're going to have to leave it right there.
Got more coming, though.
Yeah, you're watching the voice of Alabama politics, a little of the Mike Hubbard Chronicles. We're going to be right back and talk about the Supreme Court this past week.
You've always dreamed of owning a home and investing in your community, but where do you start? Ask a local realtor about Alabama's new first-time homebuyer savings account. If you're looking to buy your first home or are re-entering the market after 10 years, contact your realtor to learn how to set up a tax-free savings account at any Alabama financial institution. Savings of up to $50,000 can be used as your down payment or towards closing costs. The first step on the road to home ownership. Let us help you get there.
Hey man, what are you doing today?
Play the game. Thought I'd go out for a drive later, maybe. Text some friends while I'm doing it. Scroll through social media. Kill a family 4 and a head on Collision.
Cool, man.
Drive safe, Alabama. A message from your Alabama Department of Transportation.
Back to the V, the voice of Alabama politics. Just one more bit on this principles. They worked very hard in pre-trial to convince people that this was that there was all this confusion.
Right. This didn't just start in the trial or during the Supreme Court hearing or in the appellate court. It started long before that.
Because they wanted to, one, muddy the waters so that you would get a lot of sympathy from the business community or fear from the business community, fear from CEOs that they might be charged with the same kind of crime. It's very simple who a principal is. Maybe there's a little clarification needed, but not a lot.
But the thing is not only did they try to just do it in the media, they brought 2 separate cases before the Ethics Commission. Now, I couldn't bring a case before the Ethics Commission, but somebody as powerful as a speaker can say, hey, listen, y'all need to hear this.
But this was all worked in the background.
Worked in the background to try even then to muddy the water of who's a principal.
Hubbard used the power of his office and the power of the Republican Party to manipulate the system to keep him from going to jail.
And one of those cases, the day after the Ethics Commission gave it a thumbs up, it appeared in the Hubbard transcripts pre-trial, even though they had to go back and reverse that decision later.
Anyway, this past week, the Alabama Supreme Court finally heard oral arguments in the Mike Hubbard case some 3 years after he was convicted and sentenced. Almost to a day after he was convicted. And it was very disheartening to sit there in the Supreme Court building and listen to these Supreme Court justices who are all Republicans, who have all taken, almost every one of them have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from people that had an interest in Mike Hubbard. Many of them were friends of Mike Hubbard's. And Susan, they asked 2 softball questions of Mike Hubbard's defense, and they asked at least half a dozen, no, more than that, about a dozen questions from the state, and most of them appeared to be hostile.
They did. Now, understand that these 2 attorneys, his D.C. attorney and then the attorney from the Attorney General's office, only had 30 minutes to speak.
Right.
Now, Mike Hubbard's attorney got most of his 30 minutes with only the 2 very softball questions at the appropriate time. The prosecution for the state, he couldn't hardly get 2 words out of his mouth that they weren't peppering him with questions over and over and over and over. He of his 30 minutes, he maybe got in 10, 15.
And the biggest, they started off with hammering on who's a principal. And Chief Justice Will Sellers, who is a partisan Republican, had been a real big Republican, very strong ties to Hubbard, Bob Riley. He said that he thought the law on principles was too vague. He said it was too vague.
They've said that for years now. It's not vague. It's just not. If you can't read that and understand it, you have no business being a justice.
Yeah, I know. But, well, anyway, when you elect these people with a 60% majority by voting straight ticket, this is what you get. I'm not saying that Will Sellers is a bad
No, I'm not
guy.
either.
I'm just saying that they queried them on APCI and was this all out of state or in state?
It was almost as if they hadn't read the 154-page report from the Court of Criminal Appeals.
Right, because the Court of Criminal Appeals they didn't hear it. They looked at some 8,000 records.
Mm-hmm.
They looked at the testimony from the trial, and they concluded that the jury found properly on 11 of the 12.
Right.
And I think the court ruled wrongly on that one because that's
I
where
do
Hubbard
too.
voted with a conflict of
But they
interest.
call it conflict of interest, and I think that was a technical term in the law.
So the 154 pages, very well thought through, well argued, and now they heard the oral arguments, and it sounded like you had the seven dwarfs up there who had never even read the briefs that were presented.
Yeah, there were 7, not 9, because two had to recuse.
Right, Greg
also.
Shaw and also Jay Mitchell recused. We do not know why Greg Shaw recused. Jay Mitchell recused because his law firm, the law firm he worked for, had worked for Hubbard on his appeals.
Now, and remember, Hubbard shopped this around to a lot of shops. He had a lot of law firms working on this just because they knew, Mark White was smart enough to know that when you get to the ends of these, you're going to have people recused, you're going to have judges recused, justices recused.
Well, they
tainted the whole house.
We hear Jay Mitchell is a good judge,
Well, yeah.
does a good job. But yeah, there's conflict of interest. But now some folks say that this is just them crossing their I's and dotting their T's. Right?
Wasn't what it sounded like to me, but hey, I may be wrong.
Skeptics, those who we know who have followed this case from pretrial to last Tuesday, say that this sounds like a court who wants to let Mike Hubbard go free.
Yep.
They can't let him go free on everything, but they do think that they will let him off on the principles idea.
They do. And if they do, that'll probably reduce his sentence from 4 years to 2. Never, he's still going to have to go to jail, a lot of them say. They say they can't let him off on everything. I think if they let him off on everything, Alabama's going to toss that court next election.
Well, and you would believe that, but most of them, that are on the court are going to retire, and there's no consequences for many of them. And again, if you vote straight ticket Republican, remember before this past election, and where the Republicans reigned a supermajority in every position in state government, constitutional officers, Mike Hubbard was convicted, Robert Bentley was convicted, and Roy Moore was removed from office, and about 4 other Republicans were charged and convicted or pled guilty to federal corruption charges.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other ones, too, that were violating their own state ethics. Greg Wren was one of them.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it right there. You've been watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics. You watch us, because we watch them.